Gast aus den USA, David Rovics, der gerade aus England kommt und weiterfährt Oslo und dann nach Holland, und er hat viele Texte geschrieben zu politischen Umständen, auch zu Atomkraft, abgereichertem Uran, und wir haben heute einige Texte hier auf der Leinwand, die mit Untertiteln auf dem Beamer zu sehen sind, und im Anschluss daran werden wir noch eine kleine Diskussion machen. David hat auch ganz viele Occupy-Camps in den Staaten besucht und dort auch Konzerte gegeben, und danach werden wir uns dann auch nochmal unterhalten über die Verbindung zwischen Occupy und Umweltbewegung und die kommenden Aktionen hier in Deutschland am 12. Mai, am 20. Mai und am 15. Mai europaweit und die Aktionen, die in den USA geplant sind. David, welcome.
So we'll start with Cordova. Yeah. Übersetzung. I am a fisherman, so were my parents. Here in Cordova, on Prince William Sound, I'm not a tree hugger, but I love the mountains and hauling in the gill net with the ocean all around. Life was good here. You could raise a family with 100,000 tons of herring sent out every year. 1989, the tanker grounded. Nothing's ever been the same around here. Senator Stevens said, not one drop of oil would spill on Alaska's shores, and if it happened, it would be cleaned up. But our beaches were still covered, as was the ocean floor. 4 years passed, each run collapsed. It was then we knew for sure the herring weren't coming back. Exxon's promises of compensation were about as empty as a used up paper sack. August 20th, 1993, when we fishermen decided something must be done. We packed some groceries, we made some batters, headed out to Valdez Narrows beneath the midnight sun. 100 vessels took to the water, pushed through a storm and to the Valdez Sea. We lined up our boats, formed a blockade, and we waited for whatever might be. A tanker was approaching. It was a sight to see there in the twilight of the day. We saw it turning. We all cheered and cried as tanker after tanker after tanker turned away. A Coast Guard gunship from Seattle would take 3 days to get up to the Sound. We held the line till then we went back home to Cordova, to this hallowed oiled ground. I am a fisherman, so were my parents. Here in Cordova, on Prince William Sound. Should I do a new one that we have no translation for? I was driving in England listening to BBC, and people were calling in and complaining that BBC was talking too much about the Republican elections in the US, and I agree. You want to translate that? Do we need, Übersetzung? No? We're okay? In Germany, it's you never can win with translation, because either most people don't want it, and if you have it, then they have to listen to everything twice, and then some people really want it and get pissed off if it's not there. So either way you lose, you know. Turned on my TV, though it was hard to see these men who would be head of state. What a great country from sea to shining sea. We watched the Republicans debate. Newt stood with his third wife and said, "You bet your life the president is a red. He wants to tax the rich a lot, take your limo and your yacht. He wants to have the bankers' heads. And if he gets in again, he'll paint the White House pink, and then he'll hire Chavez as his VP. Then we'll be right on track to give capitalism the sack, along with the insurance industry. If only it were true, if only it were true, I'd be so happy, wouldn't you? If only it were true, if only it were true, if only it were true." Let's see, what's next? Watch. He'll give everyone food stamps and wheelchair ramps. He'll subsidize windmills and maple syrup. He'll cripple industries with eco-friendly policies, and pretty soon we will be just like Europe. He'll shut down oil wells. He'll give out solar cells to every home in Delaware and Illinois. He'll ban logging from the parks. He'll send the works of Karl Marx to the homes of every American girl and boy. He'll abolish pesticides. He'll be giving out free rides and free lunches too in his high-speed trains. He'll start lots of public works full of union perks. He'll fill all the cities up with bicycle lanes. If only it were true, if only it were true, I'd be so happy, wouldn't you? If only it were true, if only it were true, if only it were true. Watch out, his critics tell, this shall be our death knell. He'll pull the troops out and end all of our wars. He'll cut military spending, our empire will be ending, and soon we'll be invaded by the Moors. He'll legalize all drugs, give away beer mugs and hookahs to every child, and Korans. He'll ban religion from the schools, send 40 acres and a mule to every person who makes less than 50 grand. He'll close Guantanamo, to torture he'll say no. He'll make us all drive electric cars. He'll reinstate the fairness doctrine, take off that damn flag pin, and he'll put Rupert Murdoch behind bars. If only it were true, if only it were true, I'd be so happy, wouldn't you? If only it were true, if only it were true, if only it were true. If only it were true, if only it were true, I'd be so happy, wouldn't you? If only it were true, if only it were true, if only it were true. I'll do the Biggest Windmill. I was somewhere in Denmark when Fukushima, when the triple meltdown began, and I was thinking about Denmark. It was an interesting place to be at the time because, you know, most Western rich countries in the 60s and 70s were building lots of nuclear reactors, but Denmark wasn't. And there's a story behind that, the lack of a nuclear reactor. It was in the 1970s. The fuel crisis had begun. The choices were presented to us as if we had none. Leaders of industry said they could solve the problem by mastering the power of the radioactive atom. Some folks in Western Jutland got a notion in their heads. They thought there might be something they could offer up instead. A few hundred people gathered at a little place called Tvind and declared their will to harness the power of the wind. We're gonna build the biggest windmill in the world. We're gonna build the biggest windmill in the world. There were many who said their science wasn't sound, that such a mighty windmill would simply topple to the ground. Some of them were scientists, the vast majority were not, but they knew with years of effort you could do a lot. Word about the project spread far and wide. 100,000 visitors came to help and to advise. Until one day these windmill builders drove in with a crane and lifted up their giant wings with a mighty chain. We're gonna build the biggest windmill in the world. We're gonna build the biggest windmill in the world. When Kernkraft was completed, it reached up to the sky. Its wings churned in the air at 54 meters high. The critics all fell silent. No one now was jeering, as even industry agreed this was some damn fine engineering. The wind regaled Jutland from the North Atlantic Sea as it was seamlessly converted into electricity. It was power for the people, leukemia for none, when they declared in Denmark, just south of the midnight sun. We're gonna build the biggest windmill in the world. We're gonna build the biggest windmill in the world. They gave away the patents. They said knowledge should be free. And their plans were copied by a newborn industry. Soon Denmark would be known as a windmill building nation. And it all started with some hippies at the Kernkraft power station. Debates were held in Parliament about which way things should go. Build a nuclear reactor, the majority said no. It could have gone quite differently. In much of the world it did, except for those in Ulfborg who said we're getting off the grid. We're gonna build the biggest windmill in the world. We're gonna build the biggest windmill in the world. We're gonna build the biggest windmill in the world. We're gonna build the biggest windmill in the world. In Berlin, I think last August, and in September I got back to New York September 16th, and then the next day was the protest on Wall Street, and I knew it was happening, so I went, and then 2 weeks later the Occupy encampments began to spring up everywhere, all over North America, and you know, most people on the left thought that it was not going to go anywhere, you know, because we've had a lot of protests on Wall Street, and you know, and usually the police break them up, and then it's over. And you know, if people try to camp, then well, they don't. They never did. But this time they did, and then you know, the police arrested 700 people, and then people came back, and the media was covering it, which was very unusual. They didn't cover it at first, but after a few weeks they started. And for the first time in decades, the corporate media was talking about the division of wealth and the concentration of wealth at the top. I'm sure the owners of the media were very upset about this, but the you know, they didn't have much choice, I guess. And you know, if they left the groups alone in an Occupy encampment, these Occupies were always in the very center of town, you know, in the financial district, and usually with big skyscrapers nearby. And so, you know, you couldn't help but notice them, and so they were getting media coverage if they existed, if they kept on going day after day. But then if the police tried to stop them, then they'd get more media coverage. And then if the police used, you know, brutal methods, then they'd get even more media coverage. So they just were, you know, the powers that be were having a difficult time trying to figure out what to do, because whatever they did, you know, they would get media, which is not normally the way it works. I don't know what happened. So I was traveling around doing a tour of North America that was already planned, and then when the Occupy camps were happening, I just would do a gig, and then I'd go to the camp and do another gig at the camp at midnight. And so I'll do the Occupy song. Yeah. Because this is where they buy the politicians. Because this is where power has its seat. Because 99% of us are suffering at the mercy of the madmen on this street. Because all of us are victims of class warfare being waged on us by the 1%. Because these greedy banksters rob the country, leaving us without the means to pay the rent. Because the last time that we had a decent government was about 1932. Because we the people are supposed to run this country, but instead it's all run by and for the few. Because now we know the rich do not pay taxes, but when they need a hand it's us who bail them out. Because we suspected we lived in a plutocracy, but suddenly of late there is no doubt. So we're gonna stay right here. We're gonna stay right here. Because both my parents lost their savings. Because I have never opened an account. Because the interest on my credit card just doubled, and now I can't pay the minimum amount. Because these budget cuts are just immoral, with our schools as overcrowded as they are. Because there are no buses where I live, but I can't afford to drive a car. Because so many of us don't have health insurance. Because the rest of us have it, but it sucks. Because the rich are flying in their private jets, while the rest of us are slogging through the muck. Because capitalism isn't working. This system has just failed to produce. Because the 1% are prospering, while the rest of us just suffer their abuse. So we're gonna stay right here. We're gonna stay right here. demonstrated amply that the winners are the ones who stick around. Because this world should belong to everyone, not just the banksters who would smash it to the ground. Because we've noticed voting doesn't change things when the politicians are mostly millionaires. Because we're learning how to stand up like Tunisians, like they did in Tahrir Square, where a young man named Mohammed Bouazizi struck a match that lit up all the earth. And all around the world the spell was broken, and a movement for the future was in birth. Because there's only so much shit the rich can feed us before we figure out which side we're on. Because we've learned if we want our liberation, it will only come if we stay here till the rising of the dawn. So we're gonna stay right here. We're gonna stay right here. Because corporations are not people, and we can't just let them choose. Because if we leave our fate to them, then all of us will surely lose. Because the climate clock is ticking, and we can't just leave our world behind. Because corporate rule isn't working, and it's time for humans' hearts and minds. Because you can't take it with you, because the rich just do not care. Because it doesn't matter how much you make, but how much you can share. Because these moments don't come often, because we want truly to be free. Because we know what really matters, something called society. So we're gonna stay right